analog FPV. About 9 months ago, I reviewed the Tinyhawk Freestyle, and I really like this little quad. It's very quiet, great for flying in a park. People don't notice it, and it has really good flight time. You get about 6 minutes of flight time, and you know, it performs really well for a lightweight quad. So the one major drawback of this quad is the camera. If you're flying at dusk into the sun, you get very bad blowout, and it makes it really hard to fly, or at least makes it hard to enjoy yourself. And also the detail of seeing scraggle isn't that great with this camera. So I was going to upgrade it, but luckily Emax came out with the Tinyhawk II Freestyle. So essentially it completes the Tinyhawk II series, starting with the Tinyhawk II Whoop, followed by the Tinyhawk II Race, and now they've just released the Tinyhawk II Freestyle. So essentially the electronics are all the same between the three. The only difference, for example, is the motors and the frame, obviously. So these are the Emax 7000 kV 1103 motors. Essentially the same, well, they are the same motors that are on the original Freestyle. At least they look to be the same. And a different frame, of course. So I'm not going to go through the specs on this. I'll flash them up here on the screen so you can kind of look through them. But essentially, it's the same electronics as the other two, just in a different frame and different motors. So Emax does a great job of tuning their quads and making it more, a real true bind and fly. So I'm going to go through, you know, just getting the steps to just do basic setup, and that includes not even having to fire up Betaflight, how you would do that. And then I'll progress into what some minor changes that I'm going to make it a better experience. It's little things that I like to do. So next we're going to install the props and the orientation. It's called props in. And what they mean by that is the rotation of the prop is rotating in towards the frame. As you can see, this one's going to be rotating in towards the frame. Likewise on these rear props, it's going to be rotating in towards the frame. And then on this one, again, in towards the center of the frame. They call that props in. So one thing I would make sure you want to, I can't probably get it into focus here, but you want to make sure that your holes are aligned, and you want to be real careful that you don't cross thread the prop screws. So what I normally do is don't push it all the way down, just enough distance to where you can get the threads started. But normally what I do, I turn it backwards, counterclockwise, just to get it kind of lined up a little bit, and then I'll go clockwise. But if it doesn't feel like it's screwing in, don't force it, because you'll strip out the threads on the motor bell. So I'm going to go ahead and run mine props out, which is away from the center of the frame. And the big reason why I do that is because when it's props in like this and you run into scraggle, I have willow trees in the back, and props in, it'll get sucked in to the willows, and with props out, you're less likely to get sucked in to the willow branches and kind of bounce off more. So that's the biggest reason why I do that. So for those of you that want to keep it simple and don't want to mess with changing the motor direction in BL Heli configurator and Betaflight configurator, you just need to orient your props to props in. So this isn't a how to set up models on your remote controller. I'll link a video from Joshua Bardwell below that goes through that. This is a Jumper T16 that I'm using, but before you do, after you do create a model, you need to ensure the following. First, that the protocol is FrSky D8, and you can see here on the model setup, I have that set to D8. So next we need to go into the mixer tab and look at the channel map. Now when I create a model, the channel order is actually AETR, which doesn't match what the factory settings are. I'm showing you how to set things up without even having to go open up a Betaflight configurator. So you're going to have to go in, if your order isn't the same, you need to go in and do in this case, on this particular radio, you need to hold it down, long press, and you just go into edit, and this right here is just your label, and this is your input, so you can change it to whatever you want. In this case, it needs to be throttle. So you just need to make sure that your channel order matches this. So again, TAER, ARM is the next channel, mode, buzzer, and then, which is the D-shot beacon, and then flip over on crash, or other words, turtle mode. And as long as you set it up in those channel orders, you'll be able to use the switches accordingly. So next we're going to bind the Tinyhawk II Freestyle by pressing the bind button after you plugged in the batteries. You can kind of see it there. I just use a toothpick. Just depress the button for 2 seconds.
Telemetry lost.
I was already bound once, but I'm just showing you how to go through the process. So you hold that for 2 seconds. You can see that it's flashing red there. And then you're going to go over to the model setup, and you're going to go to bind. And you're going to select that. And then it should go to flashing blue.
Telemetry recovered.
Which it is. And you're bound. So just return, and you can see we have good signal here. So now literally you could, now of course I don't have the prop screws in, but after those are installed, you can literally go out and fly this thing now. So for those of you that are interested in just making things slightly better, the next thing I'm going to do is, instead of these tie wraps, which I don't particularly like because these wires are a little loose and I think they're going to get caught in the props here, I'm going to use some tape that I have to hold these down versus the tie wraps. Then I'm also, I don't like the antenna orientation, so I'm going to go ahead and use a tie wrap here and attach it to the arm like I normally do to get better reception, because it's hanging off the back here and it's going to be blocked by the quad itself plus the battery. And then lastly, I'm going to put some little battery pad on the top of this thing, just little strips to secure the battery. And they've already put a tie wrap for strain relief on the pigtail, so that's already done. But that's what I'm going to do to make this thing a little better. You don't have to do that, but that's going to be my preference. Quickly going through the upgrades, I used this fabric tape to hold down the motor wires more securely so they're not flying up and getting caught in the motors. I went ahead and put on some little foam rubber battery pads here. Kind of see I just stuck them down to secure the battery a little more. And then on the SBI antenna, I went ahead and tie wrapped and used some shrink tubing on that. Let's quickly get a weight comparison. Here is the original Tinyhawk Freestyle coming in at 52 grams. And here is the version 2 coming in at 56 grams. So not that much different, 4 grams different. So here are my thoughts on the Tinyhawk II Freestyle. The pros: it flies as good or better than the original. Like the first version, Emax did a great job of tuning it. I didn't have to touch the PIDs. The only thing I changed was putting on my rates. As far as other pros, I really like the 200 milliwatt VTX over the 25 milliwatt VTX on the original. It performs well, and of course the run cam nano camera is a significant improvement over the one that was on the first version. I do like that the camera angle is adjustable on the version 2, and I think it is extremely quiet like the first version, so it's well suited for park flying. And as far as freestyle performance, I think it performs well for a light twig class quad, and it does fine with light freestyle. And then also I like the SPI receiver on this one. It performs surprisingly well for an SPI receiver. I think it's probably one of the strongest receivers as far as an SPI that I've actually flown. So I think they did a good job there. Then as far as flight times, I think it's great. You get 4 to 5 minutes depending on how hard you push it. And then lastly, I think it's a good value for the money. I think it comes in very competitive in the price range. So the cons, it's not the fastest 2.5-inch quad out there, which is fine for me because I typically do just light freestyle, backyard flying and park flying. Yes, it does. The other con is, yes, the SPI receiver performs well, but it's still not as good as an XM Plus or non-SPI receiver. I do think the rates they put on this from the factory are way too low. I understand, why they did that. They did that for new pilots, but if you're an intermediate pilot like myself, you'll definitely be going in there and changing them. And then lastly, just one minor niggle. I think it should have come with a battery pad. The top deck on this thing is pretty slick, so I went ahead and added my own little battery pad strips here. So is this quad worth purchasing? I would say absolutely yes, if you're looking for a nimble, quiet 2.5-inch park flyer. Is it for beginners? I would say yes, if you are going to fly in a big park and don't have a lot of obstructions. I think that if you're trying to learn how to fly in a small backyard, this is probably not the quad for you because it is fast. I mean, it's not the fastest 2.5-inch, but it is significantly faster than, let's say, the Tinyhawk II Whoop version. So, in fact, I would say if you are a new pilot, I would suggest the Tinyhawk II Whoop version just because you can fly it indoors, it's slower, you can control it a little easier. And so if I was to pick between the two for a new pilot, I would say go with the Tinyhawk II versus the Tinyhawk II Freestyle. So the other question, is it worth upgrading from the version 1? For me, it was a definite yes. I actually stopped flying the version 1 a lot because I've been flying more at dusk, and the blowout was just too much for me when I would fly into the sun. And then also, I was going to upgrade it anyways, and since they came out with the Tinyhawk II Freestyle version, I didn't want to hassle with it. I mean, you can get 3D printed parts on this and upgrade the camera, but it was too much of a hassle. And then plus this has a 200 milliwatt VTX versus the 25 milliwatt VTX. So overall, it was a definite yes for me on the upgrade. Might not be for everybody. A lot of people have upgraded the Tinyhawk Freestyle, the first version, and are happy with it. So with that, I'm going to close with a maiden flight. And as always, thanks for watching my channel.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.